In its essence, transformation is just change. I think we use words like transformational, which is the adjective form of that, as a way to just describe what I would say is like the magnitude of the change, right? But at its core, transformation is just change. And when I think about that, I think one of the things that gets misconstrued is we think about, oh, well, we rolled out a new strategy, right? That was transformational. Or we integrated a new technology, that's transformational. The real change is the change in perspective. Because if perspectives don't change, the change never happens.
Welcome to the Warriors at Work show. This is Jeannie Coomber, your guide and host. This is a show for men and women in the workplace who want to move from the predictable to the potent. This is your weekly dose of inspiration with an edge. I talk with CEOs and shamans, sports marketing executives and therapists. All of us are like-minded thinkers and doers who tell stories, share wisdom, and challenge each other to have the best life possible inside and outside the office. Welcome to your Warrior Conversation. Hey Warriors, it's Jeannie. I am so happy to bring to you another conversation about transformation. This time with David Brown Jr., or as he likes to be called, DBJ. He's the head of operations support and business controls for the U.S. businesses at Prudential Financial. He is also an author. He's also a coach. He's also probably one of the coolest spiritual dudes I've ever come in contact with in my many years in the workplace. And we talk about transformation from his experience, how he defines it, how he embodies it, but also how he helps others to step into this transformational space. This is a really interesting conversation, and we really peel it back, make it practical, but also something that I think all of you are going to really identify with. Enjoy. David, here with me, Warriors at Work. We did it. We're having this conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I have to start with the bigger question. DBJ, why do you vibe with the word transformation? Like, why you? How is this a part of your story?
That's a great question. I mean, transformation for me, I feel like it's just a part of my core. Every part of me, since I was a kid, I feel like has always been evolving and shifting. I think as an adult, it shows up in the fact that I've moved around a lot. In the past 11 years, I've had 16 addresses, right? So
Seriously? I didn't know that.
Oh, seriously. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've lived in tiny houses in Portland, Oregon. I've done beach houses for a couple of months. So yeah, a lot of moving around. And I find that I just enjoy the process of acclimating to a new space. I enjoy the process of thinking through, oh, there's this new set of rooms. How am I going to structure that? How am I going to experience it? So on the personal front, it's sort of always been there. Professionally, in my 25 years in the workforce full time, I've had 17 jobs in that time across 6 different organizations. So the idea of transforming, reinventing, merging parts of yourself, driving change, getting people to embrace a new set of possibilities, I feel like it's just been a part of my DNA forever.
Wow. Lots of 6s and 7s in those numbers, by the way.
Oh,
Interesting.
really?
Yeah. Check that
Oh.
out. I can't believe you've moved 16 times and have had 17 different jobs.
Yeah.
Wow. So you've seen a lot of different parts of organizations. So tell me in your own words, how do you define transformation? And the reason I'm asking is, boy, is this a term that's thrown around. It's kind of like, when you hear, oh, that's value add, or, meeting the expert. What's the ROI? It's like a term that's thrown around a
Yeah.
lot. So define for me in
Yeah.
your own words what
Yeah.
transformation really is.
Yeah. I would say it's an overused term. It's been overused for a long time. But in its essence, transformation is just change. I think we use words like transformational, which is the adjective form of that, as a way to just describe what I would say is like the magnitude of the change, right? But at its core, transformation is just change. And when I think about that, I think one of the things that gets misconstrued is we think about, oh, well, we rolled out a new strategy, right? That was transformational. Or we integrated a new technology, that's transformational. The real change is the change in perspective, because if
Mm.
perspectives don't change, the change never happens, right? And that change in perspective can be employees, it can be your customers, different stakeholders, or what have you. Just rolling out a new process doesn't necessarily create the outcomes that you desire. It's the change in perspective and the level of alignment that supports whatever that desired future state is that really determines whether a transformation is successful or not.
And that can take a really long, long time. And one of the other things that I'm thinking about is there's a big emotional piece. So, right, in any change, we both have seen the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, which talks
Yeah.
about all the different stages. So it's not linear. You can go back and forth. There's also not any particular time frame in which you're going to get to nirvana or whatever that is. So talk to me about the emotions that are associated with transformation.
Yeah. So before that, I'm going to couple that with some aspects of my authenticity research that might resonate. Resonate. That's a key word, right? So one of the things that I found was that if you think about current state versus future state, people find themselves in one of three buckets, right? The first, let's talk about current state. I use the term in resonance with the current state, meaning that you're in alignment with it. Things feel good, they flow. I like how we do work here, right? The opposite side of that, you have people that may be in resistance to the current
Mm,
state. We want to do something different. Oh, it's not working well, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have people who are somewhere in the middle. It may not, you know, they may be pretty steady at their job. Maybe they work, just to live, right? So it's maybe not as much of a vested interest. So those are sort of the three buckets. But when you think about transformation and envisioning something for the future, the minute that you begin to put that out, people have a response to that, right? And what happens is there's still three buckets, but people may shift, right?
mhm.
So people who were in resonance with the current state may be in resonance with the future state, but also people that are in resistance of the current state, the future may sound really, really good, and suddenly they're in resonance, right? And so when I think about resonance and resistance, we can tie emotions to that, right? And so a lot of times, especially if it's a transformational change that we don't fully understand, we may have a natural response to that, right? And so that may bring up emotions that are a bit heavier, right? Oh, I don't want to do that. Oh, it takes too much energy. So a person may be sad, they may be angry. I like the way we do work here, right? And so I think what happens is people, especially as they get more information, they end up ebbing and flowing through a variety of emotions, almost like grief, if you will. If you don't want to leave
Mm,
the current state behind, and you've been attached to it because I've been doing this same job for 20 years, right? I'm not as open to the future state. I'll go kicking and screaming, right? And if you think
mhm.
about it, the fact that the person has done the same job for 20 years tells you something about their natural disposition for change, right? Like, no, no, I like it. And there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Right,
Because
right.
organizations need people who are steady, who are consistent, right? It provides a level of continuity, right? So yeah, there clearly is an emotional cycle that people go through, and then you have some people that are in pure joy, or excited, or happy about the future. Right? When I look at my career since '05, I did a relocation assignment out from Delaware to Arizona to help start a lending site when I worked at Chase, and it was my first time leading leaders. And I remember sitting down with the site leader at the time, and he said to me, "Hey, what do you want this to be?" And I said, it's clear to me. I want to have the best employee satisfaction, the best production, and best quality in our network. And 2 years, 8 months, and 14 days later, that's exactly what we had. And ever since that experience, like I was like, oh wow, as a leader, I can help to shape people's experiences. I can help shape
Mm,
the customer experience. And every job since then, Jeannie, has always been about driving change.
wow. I want to go back on something that you said because I love this idea of resistance to resonance. When
Yeah.
have you been able to move yourself from a state of resistance to a state of resonance? And how'd you do it?
Yeah.
Because
Last week.
I'm thinking my brain is getting flooded with people that
Yeah.
I know are in the resistance place,
Yeah.
particularly if they have a very long life cycle at that particular function or that particular company,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean it's not possible.
Yeah.
So, like, how do
And
you do it?
yeah, and I would argue that it's yes, your time in role, time in company matters, but I think fundamentally it's more about your expectations, right?
Mhm.
When I think about people being in resistance, it's because there's a fundamental underlying belief and your experience just isn't matching that,
Mhm.
right? That's the resistance. And so as recently as last week, I had this experience. My organization is going through a lot of change, right? And I came in about a year ago as a boomerang, super excited about being a catalyst for the change. And suddenly, right, and there's a ton happening in the macroeconomic environment, right? So my organization is not sort of immune to that, but there have been a lot of leadership changes that were completely unexpected for me. And so what I found myself thinking is, well, am I going to get what I wanted to get out of the deal, right? And so
Mhm.
suddenly my expectations are no longer being met. And so for me, I've been a meditator for a long time. I think it's been about a dozen years or so. And so what I find is that when I'm in an emotional state, I have to one, I never make decisions in that space, but I want to take a step back and really orient myself around the bigger picture, around sort of the higher purpose that's unfolding. And so I started meditating more and more because I'd sort of fell off the wagon for a little while. I didn't need it as much. But I found a lot of peace and comfort with just sitting with those emotions just in silence, right? Thinking about fundamentally what is it that I'm looking for, right? And what I realized is that ultimately, if my time was to end, right, I've done everything that I could
Mm.
to help to manifest some of the outcomes that I intended to manifest from the very beginning. And I found myself at peace with that. And then suddenly I'm in resonance because I understand strategically and business wise why these changes are happening, even though in the moment I may not agree with them, right?
Mhm.
But having that understanding and releasing my own expectations from the outcome, right? That was like key to getting in resonance. And so this week I found myself in peace, completely in peace, completely in alignment with who I am, right? And when you're in that level of alignment, it doesn't matter what's going on around you, right? And so I try to really bring my team into that space too. To piggyback on your point about emotions,
Mhm.
we had a group call with like my top like 50 leaders or so, and they've been hearing all these messages right for the past couple of weeks, and I told them, I said, listen, I called an impromptu meeting. It was about 20 minutes, and I said, I just wanted to check in, right? When we began this journey, I told you I'd be here. I recognize the past couple of weeks have been really, really hard. And this is not about leadership. This is about our humanity and the
Yes.
fact that we're all
Yes.
experiencing it, right? So I want you to know that the past 2 weeks have been hard for me. I've been sad. I've been angry. I felt grief, right?
Mm.
And just recently, I've sort of have gotten to clarity. And so my intention was to offer compassion and to offer empathy and just to let them know that I'm there, right? Because as we go through this process of transformation, as we know, the emotions sort of ebb and flow,
Mm.
and it's important to acknowledge them and to accept them, right? But more importantly, I wanted to know that we're all in this together. And if you need to phone a friend, then call me. I'm here to support.
What's so beautiful about that also is you getting into community. I mean, and the
Mm,
word compassion actually means to suffer with.
mm,
It's to create a connection with somebody else's state of being. And again, you go back to the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. It talks about how crucial it is to have communication when there is this emotional wave happening. It's just
yeah,
giving people an opportunity to connect with, I'm a human being, I'm having an emotion. I'm not ready to go into my thinking mind and exercise all of my intellectual horsepower. I have to be with my state of being. And I think it's just so important how you just phrase that. It's the recognition that we're in change. The
Yeah.
organization may term it transformation. We're growing, we're evolving, we're on a journey, all the buzzwords, buzzword bingo,
Yeah.
I sometimes call it. But ultimately, we're changing as an organization. And there needs to be a certain level of communication and clarity around what that's going to look like to keep everybody flowing and in that state of alignment. But I think what you said is just so powerful. So I'm just like underlining it. Love that. I also am so curious, like this is a part of kind of who you are, right? This flow and relationship you have with change or transformation, whatever you want to call it. How did you figure out that this was your jam, that you could vibe with this?
Yeah. I think the experience at Arizona was the start. Um, and when I think about, again, all the roles that I've had as I've moved from organization to organization, I found that they would leverage me to basically clean stuff up, elevate things to a certain level, and then quickly move me into something different. Right. And so as I really began to see that thread, I was like, oh, this actually makes sense. I'm actually pretty good at it. And I realized that my desire to come into a steady state and just run the everyday, I was like, nah, doesn't even nothing about that sounds fun to me. And yeah, it'll be great for someone else, but it's not for me. And so I think over the past, I would say like 10 or 15 years, it's gotten really, probably the past 10 years, it's gotten really clear. And then I think with my uh, doctoral work on authenticity and some of the findings and conclusions from that, it made even more sense around how being who you are and how that shapes sort of the values and the culture
Mm.
really impacts how people deal with change. And to me, there's a way that you can deal with change that is much more, there's less resistance, right? More grace and more compassion and more empathy, which I think would change how we feel collectively about change, right? Because I when I think about my childhood and other people's childhoods as an example, I think we naturally resist change because we've had bad experiences with
Yes.
it. Right?
Yes. That's that like little kid being like, don't do that. That didn't work. That didn't work
Yeah.
in the past.
Yeah. And some people will spend their entire life locked down,
Mm.
right? Because of some level of trauma that they've experienced that tells them, nope, I don't want to do anything different. Right. And again, that's their journey. I'm not judging it. But I've been thinking about, well, how can we do this differently? Because, we talk about things like the universe, it's constantly changing. Right. So the idea of staying static by default is in resistance to the living experience that we're all actually having.
Mm. You know, I was also thinking about, is there optimal conditions for a transformation to take place? Like to know, so to go back into your history here where you've been a part of transformation or changes, restructure, growth plans, buzzword, whatever you want to call it. But again, I'm thinking about it in terms of this, well, how we're defining transformation, which is change. What are the conditions that are necessary for that to be successful in your
Yeah.
experience?
I think about it in two sort of fundamental pieces. One is immaterial, and then one is material, right? Physical. So there is openness and willingness. So it all goes back to perspectives, right? So if you have an open mind or an open heart, right, which is your thoughts, values, and beliefs, right? And if you have the willingness to have the physical experience that supports that, those are the prime conditions for change. And so, and if you think about, fundamentally everything being energetic, right? So my perspective of being in resistance is just an energy, right? I almost envision organizations being so these balls of energy, and you've got, well, this group has this perspective, and so they want to sort of create the future. Then you have other people that have another perspective who don't want it. And the actual flip, the actual change happens when you have enough energetic momentum, Once you reach a
Mm.
certain critical mass, that's when the change happens. And that doesn't mean you need 51% of people or 100% of people in order to manifest a change, but you just have to have enough momentum. And this is where change agents, like if you think about some of the change models that are out there, change agents become really important, right? Because they can help to magnify and create energy on your behalf. You don't have to be in all the meetings, right? You get the right people who are supporting the future, right? You put them in position to influence others, and they can help be the catalyst that actually helps to change the perspective of people that might be in resistance and help to move them into resonance.
Mm. I love that. Well, why do transformations fail? Why aren't more organizations or more leadership adopting that philosophy?
Yeah, so I'll go back to the energy piece. So one thing we know is true is that they don't get enough energetic momentum.
Mm.
But the question is why, right?
Yes.
So I'll give you a hypothetical situation. When organizations decide to go on a journey of change or transformation, we all would agree that there are underlying assumptions to that, right? So here are the assumptions. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the outcomes we want to create, right? Once you start getting underneath of that and actually do the work, a lot of times you'll find the assumptions are not refined enough. You start to
Mm.
find new information, right? So, how do you feel when you've been given a mandate? Hey, Jeannie, you're going to drive this change for this organization. Here's all the assumptions. Here's the outcomes we're going to create. You sort of leave. Oh, I'm empowered, right? You're going to be the change agent, right? Suddenly you start getting underneath. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I need buy-in from this person, and this person. Oh, wait, we don't even have this type of infrastructure in place. What happens energetically for you? You
Mm.
slow down, right?
Yeah.
Because your perspective is bringing in a resisting energy, right?
Right. Right.
And so if that happens enough, right? Sometimes we just don't have the endurance, right, to get through it because there's so much resisting energy.
Mhm.
Suddenly, oh my gosh, I got to do all this to get to that outcome. I don't know if that's worth it. Right?
Or if you don't believe in the change, you don't
That's
believe
right.
in the transformation, but you have a job to do,
That's right.
how do you overcome that? So if there's a disconnect between my belief in this change versus I have an obligation to fulfill a function or a role, what do you say there?
So if I am the change agent, one, you gotta be honest with yourself and your leaders
Mm.
around what some of the barriers are, right? So you have to escalate that when you need to. One of the challenges though is depending on where you are along the journey, some leaders may not want to stop, right? So
Mhm.
suddenly the ego takes over. And it's like, oh, well, David's telling me we can't do A, B, and C, and here's why, or this is slow. But because we are bound by timelines and goals and financial performance, all those things sort of peter into my head, right? And suddenly we're doing the change regardless of whether it's really a good decision or not,
Yeah.
because we've already committed to it, right?
Yes.
And if I'm not willing to backtrack that, I look wrong, or I look unintelligent, or I look incapable, right? So leaders are willing to continue to move forward, right? And the reality is in business, we've got short memories anyway. Like, oh, David delivered this transformation, it didn't go well. A year later, he's still right flying high in the next executive position, right? And so leaders aren't willing necessarily to always come back and reevaluate the assumptions, right? Change targets because businesses create like their financial performance and what they share with like shareholders and information. Those expectations, right? Expectations is important, are already out there. And so the minute that you begin to sort of peel back on that or sort of retrench a bit, we judge people as unsuccessful, right, or
Yes.
uncapable, or what have you.
So interesting. There's so many layers to the conversation of transformation or change because There is assumptions, there's motivations, there's thoughts, there's feelings, there's perspective, there's history, there's so much that's built into this. Do you think that someone can learn to be a transformational thinker or have more comfortability around change?
Yeah, but yes, I do believe that is possible. But the journey of that is not a business leader journey. That's just a human journey, right?
Mm,
It's really tapping into who you are, right? To me, the transformation is just a reflection. Like, going back to, not only all the jobs, but all the places I've lived, right? It's just a reflection of who I am. So fundamentally, I can learn to be more open. I
mm,
can learn to be more willing, but I also have to be open to that journey, right? Some people may not be, right? And then understanding whether you're going to continue to spend energy trying to coach people to be in that space, right, or to be open to that space. But then on the flip side, I think you have people that are just naturally more open to that,
mm.
right? They acclimate to that sort of environment a little bit more easily, And it's interesting, even at a macro level, you think about how those energies can feel like they're in opposition in organizations, right? And how
Yeah.
that creates organizational tension, right? People that want to sort of maintain the status quo, and then people that are trying to build for the future, right? The key is figuring out how do we integrate that,
Mhm.
right? But people have to be willing and open to hearing and accepting the different perspectives and understand sort of how they add value. Just on a tangent, I'll share with you, like, in all these jobs that I've gone into, I always talk about, I usually come in with ideas because I've worked across different industries and different organizations, right? And so I bring a perspective that is probably going to be different than sort of the perspective that sits in the current organization. One of the things that I always talk about is it's important to honor where we are. It's important to honor the current perspective and integrate it with new thinking. So
Mm.
we go on the journey together, right? I won't come into an organization and say, well, let me tell you how we need to do this.
Yes.
That's you talk about wanting to get people in resistance real quick,
Yes. Yep.
right?
They will dig in and be
That's
like,
right.
"Just get out of here. I don't
That's
wanna
right.
hear it. I don't wanna see it. No."
That's right. That's right. And that perspective, right? So going back to the idea that, everything that I'm experiencing is a reflection of me, that perspective of integration really is it epitomizes sort of where I am in life as I'm watching everything move towards integration, right? Our global society is moving towards integration, even though it feels like everything is like blowing up, right?
Mm.
Everything is being destroyed. But to me, it is this move towards integration, being more fluid, being more in flow, right? If you will, moving people closer to maintaining a balance of resistance and resonance, and learning not to judge them, and having the tools to sort of go back and forth much more easier than we do today.
What are the best measurements of transformation that you've seen? Because what we just broke down is that even though it may be a very corporate clinical term to describe change, it's still change, and we know there's people and we know there's emotions. So like what's the best way that you've seen to measure transformation?
So most businesses will measure it based on something like ROI, right? Customer net promoter score, whatever it is, depending on what you're trying to focus on. I personally, it's about the people, right? And whether and maybe you can make the argument that net promoter score, if it changes, it's because the customer's perspective has changed, right? So if that is the intention, I would say that is probably a great measurement.
Mm.
Um, Internally, I would think about your actual employees and whether their perspectives have changed, and whether they find themselves in alignment, right, with where you're going, because that says something too, right? Because when people feel more connected to a higher purpose, right, they feel different about the work that they actually do. So to me, that tells me something about the longer term, potentially the longer term sustainability of an organization and its likelihood of being successful based on that particular initiative and as you move forward.
Mm. So my last question is, tell me, who are the transformational thinkers, really inspirational people that you follow, listen, and feel guided by, and why?
I'm gonna blow up my answer on that.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
I don't really follow anybody.
Okay.
Right? So in truth, early in my career, especially when I was leading people, I started reading some John C. Maxwell books. Right, they're my first books on leadership, and I found those to be really, really helpful. And then I evolved a bit to having a few mentors who were highly influential
Mm.
and taught me how to lead. They shared things in confidence with me that gave me a deeper insight, especially in terms of how senior leaders lead. So imagine me at 27 years old, leading frontline leaders and working with a senior executive who is helped me to understand how the big transformational decisions are being made, some of the political things. I think that is, these are things I learned in the mid 2000s that have served me really, really well with reading the tea leaves and sort of understanding the psychology around leadership and organizational development. And so I've had those people who have been really, really close to me along my journey. So there's no one sort of beyond sort of that close network of individuals. Some of them I still stay connected to. And what I found is that when some of those relationships have stopped serving, someone new comes in,
Mm.
right? And so the education and the learning sort of continues to evolve. But I don't do as much reading as what I used to early in my life and my career. I find myself spending a lot of time because I feel like I've got a strong leadership foundation based on a lot of these individuals that have worked with me or mentored me. But I find myself really just reflecting on the experience that I'm having and going deep. And what does it tell me about me?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And the more and more I focus on that, then I'm like, oh, well, this is something that I want to change about me. Right. That then plays out differently from a leadership perspective. And
Mm.
so I think it's those sort of things that are really influencing how I'm showing up. And that goes to the whole concept of authenticity and being your most authentic self as a leader.
I love the honesty. I love it. And I love how you're giving props to all of the mentors that you've had along the way and that they're still in your life feeding you. But how I just heard that is that you've got a lot of external perspective and experience that you've been able to tap into, but you're very internally referenced.
Yeah.
You spend time listening to what you hear, what you feel. And I think that's the secret to this.
Mm,
If we even just take a huge step back and where would we started in this conversation is more around what are we thinking? What are we thinking? How are we feeling? How are we working our way through situations that we don't have a lot of control over?
yeah.
It's very internally referenced. And I love that you just shared that because I think that's sort of the essence of DBJ right there in a nutshell. Why you have such a strong relationship with transformation and change and how it served you in your life and how you're still seeing it providing new experiences that are helping you grow and evolve in whatever way you want. So I'm really, really grateful that you carved out the time for
Oh,
me and for all of the listeners. And I'm just thrilled that I get to be a part of your journey. And I thank you so much for being here.
you're welcome. And the feeling is certainly mutual. Thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Warriors at Work show. If you are interested in learning more about what we do at the Warriors at Work show and platform, be sure to go over to my website, Jeannie Coomber, and subscribe to my monthly Warrior Playbook newsletter. I share everything that I'm up to month by month, as well as some lessons and insights that I've learned. I'm also interested in hearing any feedback you have about this conversation or future topics. So reach out to me directly on jc@jeanniecoomber.com or on LinkedIn. Be sure to tell your friends and your colleagues about this Warriors at Work conversation. Subscribe, review, and rate us. It's the best way to get this message out into the world. Be well.